Guys, thank you very much. I'm going to click this button and hope everything goes fine. Here we go. So, I'm here to talk to you about how to put the customer first and primarily how to understand your customers better online. As I've already been introduced, my name is Marcus Cooke. I'm a director at Space Between. I'm from England. You might have been able to tell by the accent. It's slightly different from most of yours. I'm from the north of England, Manchester, and I currently live in the south, so I'm a foreigner in my own country. People from the south generally speak with a slightly more refined accent. The reason I moved down is because the weather's much better. It's kind of like this, but less hot. Manchester is known for its significant amounts of rain, and the south of England is most definitely not. I am a big fan of skiing. Recently went to the Alps with my wife, and it was transformative. So, there we go. This is what I specialize in making visitors to a website more likely to complete a transaction or a goal or anything that you want them to do, essentially. And a nice metric that we had in the past year was we essentially did that 2,400% for our clients. Space Between, we are a biometrics, user experience, conversion optimization, and UI consultants. We used to be more full service, but we've essentially narrowed down and we're very specialized at what we do. And we've seen great success in essentially pairing these different disciplines together. The reason we do these is because each one feeds into the next. And being a specialist in one means that you can essentially feed the learnings into the next one. So here are some of our American clients. We primarily work in the UK, but these people do have presence in America as well. So P&L Cruises, GHD, hair straighteners, Reese, a high street fashion brand, generally in the high end, Evans Cycles, they sell bicycles, ASOS, Legoland. We do various different pieces of services for these guys. So P&L Cruises, so for example, we perform UX research and conversion optimization for, whereas GHD, we're just providing the UI aspect. So what I'm going to be talking about a little bit is our process. Primarily, one, who are your users? What do they want? What problems do they encounter when they're purchasing with you online? How can we then fix those problems? And did our fixes work? What do we do at the back of that? How does that feed in to the greater cycle of product development? And also, primarily, are the customers happier? So what I'd like to do is kind of define a brand, because some of the exercises I'm going to go through here are much more helpful if we can tie it back to this idea of some kind of company. So bear with me here. This is we're talking about a men's high street fashion brand. They have 50 stores across the country. The business started 10 years ago and currently making $8 million in revenue. When we work with companies, we go in there and they tell me that they know who their customer is. Often, we find that that's not true. They might have more complex demographics about that person, but they've never actually sat down in a room with them and actually had a conversation. So for this fictional customer, they have an idea of who the customer is, and they think it is a single young professional who works in a city, has a fairly good paying job, and might be a loyal customer to them because it's the people that they encounter day to day. Actually, what we find is that their customer base is much more widespread, and so the loyal customer might only be 60%, but you've got to consider all these other edge cases as well. So you might have a blue-collar worker who's new to high-end fashion, and what they want to do is they essentially want to purchase maybe a nice jacket for a new date. It might be a mother buying a son, buying clothes for her son. A woman shopping for a partner, potentially she wants to introduce him to her parents, and so she wants him to look nice. Or potentially even a customer who's new to the brand, but not necessarily to the market and shopped with your competitors before. So if you can think about customers not just as one small segment, but as a multitude, it's a pretty damn good place to start. You need to define who these people are. And then you need to define what they want. So to give you an idea, we have two different aspects for this. And now what I'll say is the B2C ones are relevant for B2B as well, primarily because in the B2B market, you are selling to people, right? You have to take into account the company. But realistically, there are people involved, and so you need to understand exactly what their wants and needs are. So for demographics, general information, social data, gender, birthday, language, location, psychographic, so a user's interests, beliefs, affiliations, or socio-economic status, behavioral, so how someone actually interacts with your product, and then the B2B stuff is essentially all that plus firmographic, so information about the company, number of employees, revenue, turnover, physical locations, and the technographic. What CRMs do they use? What content management system do they use? All these things define essentially your digital customer, and you need to understand all these different aspects to properly sell to them and properly understand their challenges, and also define who they are so that later on we can recruit the right people to actually talk to. So we know who they are. Now we need to define what is it that they actually want. So what is the problem that they're trying to solve, and what are the problem that you help them with? So in the case of the high street fashion brand, it's they want to buy a jacket online. Then you need to dig into the motivation behind the problem. Is it a case of, for one of the segments of users, a fear of not fitting in? Is it a fear of missing out on the latest fashion trends? Or is it potentially an aspirational purchase? And then you need to consider what questions are they going to have when they're purchasing this. So is it going to be so you're going to buy clothing online, you want to know how long is it going to take to get delivered? You're going to want to know, does it fit me? And so answering these questions and figuring out when the user is going to ask these are instrumental to the process to designing a proper and well thought out customer journey. State of mind. Does your target audience buy primarily when they're on the train to work? Are they doing it on the tube? Are they doing it on the mobile phone with a small period of time? Again, these are all aspects that you need to take into consideration. And then the touch points. So while primarily we work with businesses online, there's lots of other touch points. It's not just that one website. It's when did they hear about your brand? It's when they've actually purchased with you. How do you talk to them in the confirmation email? How then do you tell them and reassure them that the product is going to be delivered on the date that you've already mentioned? And when the product comes to them, does it still reflect your brand experience? And so understanding the customer journey throughout its entire life cycle, not just what they're doing on your website in a holistic sense, is much better. So we need to define the user's needs, and I feel like we've got that bit there. So the people on the left here, they need to get from A to B, and they'll essentially pack themselves on a train to do so. And then now, and we know who the people are and what they want to do. We need to find the problems that they're having. So this section is about how to find the issues. We use two various methods, so qualitative and quantitative research. Qualitative, for those of you who don't know, is people talking, surveys, questionnaires, opinions. Quantitative is numbers, hard data, and graphs. I'm going to talk a little bit about qualitative research here and how we do it at Space Between, and some actionable insight that you guys can use as well in your day-to-day business. So the primary way that we do this is moderated one-on-one user research. And what that actually means is that we get your real customers, we get them in a room, we stick a real-world device in front of them, and we try to get them to complete the process that your users normally would. And that can look anything like this, which is more of a complex setup with a one-way mirror, sorry. So the other side of it looks like a mirror. This side is a window. Screens on the side, you've got the participants in a normal kind of lounge setting where you can observe their behavior, and you've got two weirdos in a room behind. It's kind of creepy, but it is the super far end. You don't have to go to that extent. It can be literally, come here, sit next to me, let's buy this thing online. It doesn't have to be a super expensive thing. And what I'd say is, if you're just dipping your toe in the water, if you've not done this before, make it nice and easy. Just grab some people off the street that are your demographic and give this a try. Firstly, first step is finding representative users. Now, representative means the people that we've already identified in your demographics earlier. So initially, the best way of doing it is find a nice wide set of people that fit all those different segments that we've identified. Incentives. So you will have to pay people to come and do this. Generally, people's time is not free. What I'd say to you is, don't find something that is, don't give them a gift card for your brand, because then they know that you're testing for yourself. Ideally, give them some kind of monetary incentive. Don't talk about yourselves as a company. Say that you're doing this research on behalf of a third party, so there's no, don't feel obliged to essentially help you there. How many people to get? So what we say to people is, if you're doing this kind of research, anywhere between 6 and 12 is good. You get diminishing returns, and it will cost significantly more money for very little gain. 6 is kind of the sweet spot. The analogy that I like to use is that imagine you have a dark room, and in that dark room, you've got holes in the floor. If you start pushing people through that room, they're going to start falling through the same holes repeatedly. So with user research, you need to find those holes, you need to fix those ones, and then shove another set of people through the room and find the next set of problems. One thing I will say is that if you're doing more qualitative research, then the numbers should necessarily be higher. But for this kind of set, 6 to 12 is quite nice. And some people go to me, well, don't I want to find 100% of problems? And I go, well, yes, you do. But at the same point, how much do you want to pay for that? Because, realistically, between 6, which is 80% of the problems, and 12, which is closer to 100%, like 95%, you're essentially going to be doubling the cost. Is that worth it to your business? Often the case is no. So we have the users now, and now we need to give them representative tasks to perform. And this isn't as simple as I've already made it. It's not go buy that thing online. It's more around get them in the right mindset. So when you get a user in to do your session, they're not really, especially if they've not done this before, they're not going to be ready. They're not going to be in the right mindset. So you have to coach them through it. You have to essentially talk to them about what you're going to get them to do. So when you're purchasing clothes online, who do you do it with? Do you sit next to your partner? Do you do it on the train? Do you do it while the kids are running around? To get them in the right mindset so they're considering the proper things as if they would do it at home. So do you look at reviews online? Do you go onto social media and see people wearing a similar thing? So give them a real-life scenario of using the product. So a bad example is buy the product and check out. A good example is you're going away on holiday. It's going to be cold. You're going away with your family, and you need to find something that is going to match the clothes you're taking on holiday as well. And you want to make sure that the price is not going to surprise you excessively. So actually buy something you would actually want to purchase and own, and the cost is not prohibitive. So you're crafting this story that they can buy into, and it gives them more of a narrative where they can put themselves in their own shoes and essentially proceed through the task as they actually would, rather than this contrived scenario. Thirdly, you need to shut up and let the users do the talking. This is difficult, and primarily this is difficult because when you get these people in, if they've not done it before, they won't talk. You want a raw stream of thought from the user. You want their unadulterated opinions and thoughts of the process that they're going through. To do that, you're going to have to prompt them. And when you prompt them, you need to be very careful. And I'll talk about bias in a little bit to make sure you don't overly influence their behavior. But a couple of things that can make it easier, make them more feel at ease, make sure you have a nice, clean room, clean environment, nice comfy chair where they can sit back and relax and they feel comfortable sitting there and talking to you for a period of time. Have an actual human conversation with them. Don't just bring them in and say, okay, I want you to do this task, etc., etc., etc. Ask them about the day, ask them about how they're feeling, because, by getting them to relax and sit in the situation, you essentially create a baseline where you can see, okay, so this is how they react in a normal social situation. And when you essentially stick them through a product that is frustrating, you can essentially understand, okay, so this is how that affects them. Bias. So like I said, this is difficult, especially when you're prompting people. You don't want to ask questions like, did you like that jacket? Because then they essentially will exhibit behavior that they wouldn't normally have done at home, because they'll stop and go, oh, actually, did I like that jacket? You don't want to ask questions like, did you find this feature frustrating to use? Because then again, there's a period of self-reflection there where they have to think about it. And also, using the word frustrating, it's you're essentially leading the conversation there. And also, what do you think about that blue jacket? It's not necessarily on this more which products people are picking. It's more around the behavior. It's more around forcing them out of their natural state. So, how to not fuck it up. Don't ask questions that can be answered with a single word. Inevitably, you will ask questions that are very open-ended, and because people are difficult, they'll give you a one-word answer. There's not much you can do about that other than try and ask it in a slightly different way. Again, don't bias the behavior, very open-ended. What did you think about this thing? How did that make you feel? Not, did you like it? Because you will get yes, and that is no use to you whatsoever. Practice your questions beforehand. So grab a colleague, grab a friend, grab a partner. Ask these questions and see what response you get. If you get a yes or a no, then, change it. Also, get out your poker face. So it's not just about verbal communication. It's about non-verbal communication as well. So it's all about the way that you use your face, the way you lean into questions and show interest. By doing that, you can also prompt someone to essentially dig in deeper and start to explain their behavior and drop out of that natural behavior there. So again, you need to be very careful, and it is a skill that you can develop over time, and you will fuck it up, and that's fine, but just mitigate that and try and prep as much as you can. Next step, qualitative surveys. So any marketers in the room, you probably know about Net Promoter Score. Don't really need to go into that. We use this at the back end. So if we're running a user research session for the brand we mentioned previously, we'll get them through to do the task, and then we'll give them an exit interview. And that exit interview will include these 2 surveys plus others.
Sorry, could I just give you a different microphone? Sorry,
yeah.
everybody. It's a bit crackly.
Okay.
Just one moment.
Probably the accent.
Yeah.
Hello? Is that crackly? Okay, good, all right. So yeah, Net Promoter Score. We ask this at the end. Generally, if people are going to promote your product, they need to give you a very positive answer. So yeah, I'm not going to labor that point at all. So the second set of questions we ask is the system usability score. This is a framework developed in the 80s. It's been used across thousands and thousands of different user experience tests, and it's had quite a few research papers on it as well, so it's very well researched and it's quite robust. There's a couple of caveats to using it though. Because it was made in the 80s, the language is very dated. We ran a session recently with a food company, we'll get to that in a second, and there's a lady there who does the shopping for her family, and there's a question that says, did you find this experience cumbersome? And she had to admit to me in a room full of people that she didn't know what that word meant, and it took a lot for her to say that. We don't have to use that word. Difficult will suffice. It's an easy change. And the research suggests that you can change this and it won't impact the outcome. Also, you can remove one of the questions as well without actually impacting the scale. So what I'd recommend is look at this objectively, look at your demographics, see if it's going to cause excess friction. If it is, change it, make it work for you guys. Next bit. So qualitative/quantitative biometrics. This is where we do the user research, but we layer on an extra few streams of data here. The reason why we use biometrics is that we have user motivation, and if you think of user motivation as a pie chart, because everything is better as a graph, you can ask someone, do they remember this thing, in the exit interview? And you can get to about 20% of the actual reason why they made that decision. There's much more under the surface there. So say, for example, did it make me smile? Did it connect with me? Did I notice the key information that would motivate me? So like the pressure selling or the urgency or building confidence. Am I motivated to act? So is there a subconscious part of my brain that this appeals to? And then there's also an unexplainable session. So it might be you're trying to sell bananas online and the user wants a banana when they're ill, and now anytime they think of bananas, they despise them. You're not really going to know that without digging in deeper. There's always going to be some part of the human experience that we just can't dig into. But with the toolkit that we use, we can get a lot more done there. So if it's just self-reporting, so if you're doing a normal user research session, you can get the top part of the iceberg. And I think iceberg is a nice way of looking at it, but it's more like a spectrum where you have conscious behavior at the top and you've got unconscious further on down. As you get further and deeper, you get to the more unconscious behavior. So the next step is facial expressions. Generally, when people are talking, they're not going to really pay attention to what they're doing with the face. It just does what it does. You can control that, obviously. And then skin conductance, so how your body reacts to like stimulus, so how much you're sweating, that kind of thing. Again, you can control these kind of things if you're trained to do, but the vast majority of us can't. So, if you've ever heard of like a lie detector test, there's reasons why that's not permissible in court, because people can actually fake their reaction to those kind of things. Eye tracking, so exactly where somebody's looking. If I show you a website, it's, I'm weird to see where you're looking on that website. You're probably not going to influence the behavior there. And then EEGs, which is electroencephalograms. What we do there is essentially stick a cap on someone's head, and I'll dig into that a bit deeper, but we can see which areas of the brain are firing. When we show you a picture of a cat, you pretty much can't change the way that your brain reacts to a picture. So this is a suite of tools that we use to understand more about the user motivation. And if we can understand more about the user motivation, then we can proactively make decisions that impact them in a positive way. So this is how we test biometrics, or it's one of the ways. You can see on the left-hand side is the screen with all the sensors and the data coming in. On the right-hand side, you can see the participant. So you can see she's got an electroencephalogram cap on her head. So that's essentially small electrodes attached to the scalp. You can see a scene camera pointing down at the phone. There's an eye tracker looking up at her eyes. It just gives you an idea of exactly how this kind of stuff is used in situ. So, eye tracking. This is a small recorder that we put on the bottom of the screen. It shines a light into an infrared light into people's eyes, and then it checks to see the reflection of the cornea. From that, we can see exactly where the user's looking. What this looks like is essentially a small device like that you can put on a laptop or a monitor screen. Second, you can grab some glasses. Now, they're not the most fashionable looking glasses in the world, but they do perform a good job. Very similar, but you can use this in real life scenarios. So, you can use it when someone's driving a car. Did the user notice that pedestrian? Or you can use it where, say, you're walking around a supermarket and you're trying to sell different cereals. You can see exactly which cereals draw the user's eye, which part of the boxes draw people's eye. So it's quite a good way of understanding how users interpret the environment. This is a rough idea of how it works. As you can see, you've got the candidate on the right-hand side. You've got the screen on it as well. And then we've got the eye tracker at the bottom of the screen, essentially a box that the candidate sits in 3D space where they can move about and we can still detect their motions. I won't go into super deep, but essentially it uses a few different algorithms to detect how that shine on the eye and how the light is being interpreted on the cornea. And then we can figure out where they're looking on the screen. The accuracy is about the size of one of your finger thumbnails, so it's actually fairly accurate. You can understand exactly where people are looking. So I'm going to try and play this video. This should give you an idea of how it works. Fingers crossed it's going to work. Come on. And go. No. Well, what it would show you is we have our candidate on the left, and then we have a website on the right, and there's various different movements of the eye moving up and down this page. You can see there'll be a yellow dot and it moves up and down. You can see how the user scans across the website. So one thing that you might think, and it's slightly counterintuitive, is that people read from left to right, and it really moves from left to right in a fairly linear fashion, moving across and then down and across and then down. What actually happens is that people are a lot more sporadic, and so there's lots of jumping about all over the place. And so when you see that, it helps you understand various different things. So we've run a few tests on various different email campaigns, and one of the things we found is big blocks of text don't work. And we've conclusively found evidence that people don't read these things, they can't properly understand the information there, and they're not willing to expend the effort to do so. So if you stick it in bullet points instead, people are much more likely to engage in that because there's a clear flow of information, they can skim read it a lot easier, and they'll skip the bits that don't find interested and move on to the next. Where if they're doing it in a big paragraph, they're going to struggle, and they'll essentially just back out of it altogether as soon as they find the first thing that doesn't interest them. Try to go to the next one. It's not moving. Fantastic. I'll just use that instead. So this is the data that we get out of it. You might have seen heat maps before for mouse tracking studies. What this is actually where someone's looking online, and this is a study we did with ASOS, who's a fashion brand. You can see the dark red areas are where people spend most of the time, and going from yellow to green to white where people spend none of it. This is super good for us because we can understand which bits of the page that people spend the most time looking at and whether or not they're looking at the key information of the product as well. So we know that at a certain point in the journey, people will want to know about delivery information. They want to know whether or not they're getting free delivery, when it's going to be delivered. If we see that the vast majority of people aren't looking at that thing at that stage, we know there's a problem. We know that it's not, it's potentially not highlighted enough. It's not. We need to draw that more attention to that, such that people get the proper reassurance they need when they need it. Not to mention that we can understand how long people are looking at these things as well and how they progress through the page. So this is overkill. We don't really do it like this, but it shows you the amount of data that we can get out. So we can essentially segment certain parts of the page and figure out how people proceed through it. So we have this metric called time to first fixation, and you'll see that on the graphs as TTFF, and that is essentially how long it takes for someone to first look at that thing. And there's two main metrics really, which is fixations, and that's I'm looking at that thing for a fixed period of time, versus a gaze, which is I'm scanning across things. And so what we're looking for in this really is how long it takes for someone to fixate on that thing and try to understand it, and then how long they spend doing that and then move on. So this is where the quantitative aspect comes in. We can figure out which elements people look at in which order and for how long. So the blue bar is the one I'll ask you to pay attention to here. This is time to first fixation. So the product image is 0.13 seconds. And then the next one is they look at the video buttons, then the sizes, then the thumbnails, cart, CTA, etc., so on and so forth. Now, I'm not going to try and show you this video because it will probably break, and I don't want to deal with that again. What it does show you, though, had the video played, is that there is a significant difference between eye tracking and mouse tracking, and we ran a study with, internally to understand exactly how you can interpret these results and whether or not the tools that you see like MouseFlow, like Hotjar, SessionCam, and their mouse tracking tools, whether or not they're providing reliable data that you can actually action. We found there's 3 distinct types of users and how they use the mouse. The first one is they'll move the mouse off to the side, and we saw this in quite a few different older people, that they'll literally get it out of the way so they can read things properly. So if you're looking at mouse tracking data, those users, it's not of any use for. The second category is that the people will move their mouse, but they'll move it after they've looked at the thing with their eyes, and it's generally about 5 seconds latency there, where someone will look at, say, the cupcake in the middle, and then they'll move their mouse to it, and then they'll look at the next one, and then they'll move their mouse to that one. And again, when we're trying to do user research, we need as much accurate data as possible. Without that, it's hard to make the right decision. And then the third one is that people actually move the mouse with the cursor, and we found this is probably like 10% of people that do this. It's not a common behavior, but what I'd say is for those people, mouse tracking is a good indication of exactly where people are looking. So that's eye tracking. Next bit is galvanic skin response. So this is a weird-looking sensor that attaches electrodes to your fingers, passes a small electric current between them. It's small that you can't detect what it is, you can't feel it. And it detects how much you're sweating. Now, when I say sweating, I don't mean dripping with sweat. It's small changes in sweat. It's essentially a physiological response to stimuli. So if I said to you guys, you know, do you like cats? And some of you hated cats and some of you loved cats. For those with a strong positive emotional response, I could see, if I showed you a picture of a cat, within 1 to 5 seconds, yes, that person had an emotional reaction to that picture, which is super, super good when we can say, you know, on a website, we show people different products and we go, yes, we saw a positive emotional response when someone looked at that product. This is what it looks like in situ. You have the device strapped to the candidate's wrist, and then you attach the electrodes to their fingers. What I'll say is with this that it looks scary, and people are scared initially, but this is why it's important to baseline them and to talk to them. So you stick this on them early, and then you sit them down and you have a conversation, and within 5 minutes they forget they have it on, because people are used to wearing rings on their hands, so it's not really a massive deal, as long as you deal with it in the right way and you explain to them exactly how we're going to use it and what it's going to feel like. It's not necessarily a problem. You can put these in various different places, so you need to put them in places with like large amounts of sweat glands, which is generally the hands or the feet. What I'd recommend is don't ask people to come into a room that you've never met before, take off their shoes, and then strap electrodes to their feet. It's not going to go very well. This is the response out the back of it. It looks like a load of crap, but there's 2 things here. So we have the underlying phasic response, which is essentially the most amount of the graph there. That is changes that your body reacts to, such as temperature or hunger levels. And then we have a much more, it's like a lower latency signal that sits on top, and that's where you can see all the little pink arrows. We call those GSR peaks, and those essentially, like I was mentioning with the cat, if I show you a picture of a cat and you like it, within 1 to 5 seconds I'll see one of those small peaks. There's 2 ways that we use this. One, so if I present you with a stimuli of a product and I can see a positive reaction at the back of that at the other end, then we can conclusively say there was actual emotional connection to that thing. Secondly, we do a lot of competitor research, so we compare brands versus other brands. If we go, I want to compare this brand's checkout versus this brand's checkout, and we know that we don't want emotional responses in the checkout, right? Because if someone sees a price and panics, that's generally a bad thing. Or if someone isn't sure of how to purchase, again, that's a bad thing. We know we don't want a person to feel any particular strong emotion when they're carrying out a more of a transactional function through that interface. So we can aggregate across all the candidates on the both brands and say, brand A has less GSR peaks than brand B. Brand B's GSR peaks are when they interact with this payment field and this button, and so then we can, again, conclusively say that brand A is significantly better in this case, and we should learn from the patterns that they've chosen. Thirdly, facial expression analysis. So you can see my two beautiful models here. They have quite different faces, but what you probably be able to see is there's a box, and then there's various different white points on the face, on the eyebrows, on the eyes, on the nose, around the mouth, and then on the jaw. These dots are essentially mapped to the face, and they change depending on the expressions that somebody makes. What this is a trained AI model, and it's trained on 7.5 million faces in 87 different countries. The split between the East and the West of the world is even. So while there are cultural differences between how people display basic emotion, it is a robust enough model generally. These are the emotions that it pulls in. So joy, or bliss maybe. Anger, well, she's super angry. And surprise. What we say is that you see all those different points, they map to expressions. Those expressions then contribute to some kind of emotional response. So, you know, for joy, you might have essentially smile on the mouth, you know, eyebrows relaxed. Whereas surprise, eyebrows up, mouth open, eyes wide. We can look at the expressions underneath. So, you know, if we do have cultural differences and someone shows surprise in a slightly different way or anger, then we can essentially dig down and find out more information. Electroencephalograms. So these are super scary looking devices, and we don't tend to use these often, primarily because people don't like being strapped with lots of electrodes on the head. So when you put one of these caps on, if any of you've had this done to you before, you need to have your scalp scraped to remove the dander so they can have a nice conductive thing, and also a small gel applied as well. So it's not something you want to do to someone you want to make friends with in the short term. But what this lets us do is essentially detect cognitive and motivational processes. So does your brain light up in the right way? Do you have a strong sense of motivation to purchase that thing? So it is a super strong piece of research equipment, but it has to be used in the right way, in the right context. This is the kind of data that you get out of it. So you can see frustration levels rise over time, along with things like excitement dropping, engagement, boredom. So it is, again, it's a real good piece of technology, and it just gives you a lot of information at the back of it, but you need to use it in the right situation. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about one of the case studies that we've done. So this is a company called Waitrose. So essentially, they're the UK's Whole Foods. They have a fantastic mobile website, and so we ran a study with them recently where users would shop on their phone. They'd have to essentially purchase around about $80 worth of goods before they'd be eligible for delivery. They'd go through their phone, they'd add their products, they'd search for the products, they'd change the number of them, and then they got to the checkout. And what they saw at the checkout was this thing. So they clicked checkout, so they clicked the button on left and then got delivered into this horrific thing on the right, which is essentially a desktop website delivered on a mobile phone. If you look at like the green, different green, the logo's different. Not to mention that when I tested this, it threw out a system error, but what you normally see on this page is loads and loads of products that they're trying to upsell, and so it's just a poor user experience, especially when the users have just gone through a fantastic one. What the users told us, this is, again, the system usability scale that we talked earlier. After they'd done the task and we did the exit interview, they rated Waitrose the lowest of all three. When we looked at the emotions based off the facial recognition, they essentially had the most positive emotions from Waitrose. So why is that? Why are they self-reporting that they had such a poor experience, and then on aggregate throughout the process, they were smiling and happy the most? They'd found the least frustrations. That's because on the right here, you can see this is the journey, and the different colors are essentially the emotional states in those sections of the journey. people towards the end despised the order review and the payment, which are the two red bits. There are some red bits and yellow bits in the rest of it, but realistically, most of it's green. It's mostly positive. So with this, if we just used essentially what the user told us and didn't dig in deeper, and we didn't have these extra streams of data, we wouldn't have essentially been able to understand, okay, this bit is fine. The user found this bit okay. The first 4 sections, I guess, and we wouldn't have understood that quite exactly how the drastic impact that the negative sections had. So if you've not encountered this before, this is negativity bias. So as humans, unfortunately, we're more likely to focus on the negative aspects of life. We're more likely to rate negative experiences or talk about negative experiences more so than an equal positive experience. And so when we're designing products and when we're building products, we need to make certain that we fix the terrible things so much quicker than we focus on the bits where we delight our users. We need to bring everything up to par. And so Waitrose needs to do that as quick as possible. That is essentially the biometrics section. Was anyone on any questions around that now? Happy to field some. No? Okay, good. We can chat at the end if needed. So the next section is quantitative analytics. For those of you marketers in the room, you probably know about this already, so I'm going to skip through it fairly quickly. What we do is we combine this with the user research and the biometrics to essentially understand generally where the main problems are, and then with the user research and biometrics, we understand what the problems are. So where might be on the payment page, what might be the payment field, the sort code information, that kind of thing. So funnel dropouts, very quickly, you need to identify the core customer journey, find out the dropouts at each stage, and this will help you to understand, to prioritize which areas first. So to give you an example, you can see that there's the vast majority of the dropout on this section here is on the cart stage, which is the first one. You can see the red line dropping off. It's about 80%. So realistically, there's a lot of money to be made by optimizing that stage as much as possible. Analytics and technical tracking. One of the things that we like to do is make sure that you're tracking events on your website properly. So by that I mean, if you have a form on a page, make sure you don't just track the submission, you track when the user clicks into the first one, when they come out of it, how long it takes between that first one and the second one, and so on and so forth throughout the entire page. So then you can do dropouts on a per page basis, not just on the holistic sense. Another good thing is scroll depth. How far does someone scroll down a page? You don't have to use tools like Session Cam to do this. You can set it up in Google Analytics very easily. Speaking of Session Cam, you don't always have to essentially get your real users in. You can actually see the users day to day and how they use your site. So Session can provide a great service of looking at your users and seeing how they perform on a day-to-day basis. So you can replay the sessions. It's a little bit creepy because generally people don't know their sessions have been recorded. But this is why we have all those fantastic cookie policies that everybody enjoys, because it should tell them about it. Mouse tracking, spoke about it a little bit already. In the right hands, it can be useful if you want to understand where people are essentially moving through your site. It's a good thing. So say, for example, here you can see that on the Session Cam website, more people go through the navigation than essentially interact with the rest of the page. And I would posit that that's probably because the rest of the page is garbage and they need to fix that first. Quickly, website errors. If you have a tool, find a tool that essentially tracks website errors. Session Cam does it quite well for you. When I say website errors, I mean JavaScript errors. Very quickly, find those, fix them. You leave them on in the table. If you get it done very quickly, it's very easy to make gains. Next is expert audits. So what I mean by that is essentially find a usability expert, someone who has worked in your vertical sector before, find someone who is very good from an aesthetics and also a usability perspective, has potentially ran user research sessions before, and get them to run a audit on your website, looking for things like usability, information architecture, conversion, user flows, accessibility, and they will find the quick wins for you. So things where you're violating best practice, say, for example, or things where your competitors are essentially solving the same problem in a more elegant fashion. And this is a slight bit of shameless self-promotion here. At the moment, for you all, we are offering free audits. So what I'd say is, if you're interested, come have a chat. I'll plug it again at the end just to remind you all. Any questions on that before we move on? No? Okay. So this next step is, we know what the problems are. We know how it's impacting the users, but how do we decide which ones to fix? And how do we decide in what order as well? So this is where we essentially can figure out which order we should fix them. So let's say, for example, a high street fashion brand. This is a very simple user journey, given homepage, category page, product page, cart, checkout, payment. Let's say that we know that the product page, the cart, and the payment are horrific, and we need to fix them first. Okay, in which order do we fix them? So this is where we bring in the various different streams of data that we've used. So if we can see the problem in analytics, that's one point. If we can see it, if it's, a user has self-reported an issue on that page, that's another point. If we found it in the UX audit, there's another. Facial recognition, GSR peaks, et cetera, et cetera. So this is why we layer in all these different pieces of data such that we can be more confident that we're focusing on the right problems at the right time. So based on this information, we should focus on the payment, the cart, and then the product because we're more sure that there's an actual issue there. We know what the problem is. Now we need to figure out exactly how we're going to fix it, and there's lots of different ways of doing this. So best practice. What is commonly regarded as good within the industry. There's various different ways of sourcing this information. So there's a website called Good UI, which does great explanations of different patterns that you can use and apply them to your website. Google, there's a couple of Google playbooks released that were internal, and they have great ways of explaining different patterns you can use in different vertical sectors, competitor solutions. So then if you have a aspirational competitor and they're potentially bigger than you, they've been doing this for longer, don't feel shy, steal as much as you can. User suggestions. So what I'll say to this list actually is as well, this is probably sorted in the order that I would pick these. So if you can pick best practice that's better than competitor solutions, because not necessarily is that they've done is going to work for you. You should test these things as well. User suggestions. So this is essentially what the user is recommending. And then business suggestions. So you might have internal stakeholders within the business who think they know how to solve these problems. I would always recommend moving through this list in this fashion because often these people are blinkered. They don't actually have the answers they think they do, or they potentially don't have the time to research into these things. So it's important that you do take that with a pinch of salt. Inevitably, what you'll find is that it's really difficult to understand all the different ways of skinning a cat, essentially. There's lots of different options. What we like to do is essentially create a strategy map. So at the top, if you can read it, it says cart checkout rate. And there's various different strategies along solving that. So simplifying decision making, funnel path optimization, reducing the steps in the checkout, all the way through to like seasonality changes or personalization. What I'd say is that you don't have to have this from the get-go. You should build this over time. When you're solving similar problems, there are sometimes similar solutions. And so building up this thing is super helpful because it will prompt you to remember, okay, so we need to solve the cart checkout, right? Have we considered skipping upsells, for example? Potentially not. Have we thought about, abandoned basket emails? Hopefully. Or, potentially, have we thought about giving users targeted offers and content? This will also prompt you to potentially have the conversations within your business with your key stakeholders to get this stuff moving. Sometimes, without these prompts, you might might not want to do this because of the effort involved, because of the perceived effort within the business to get this stuff moving. So if we're going back to the case study of the high street fashion brand, and we know we have the problems on the payment page, these are the three that we're going to focus on how we're going to solve that problem on the payment page with these three tactics. So addressing questions and concerns. So the question on the payment page might be, again, I need to know about the delivery, how much it's going to cost me, when is it going to come, reducing pressure of the decision. So there's a few different ways of doing this. You can mention free returns within 30 days if that's your policy. You know, you essentially want to reduce the pressure on the person, especially when you're doing high ticket purchases. You know, often with insurance and travel products, you get time to cancel. So reminding the user on that page is generally a good thing. To skipping upsells. So like we saw with the Waitrose example earlier, if Waitrose just didn't have that stage at all, their customers would have such a much better experience. So the tactics we're going to focus on: addressing questions, concerns, skipping upsells, reducing pressure. So we could add messaging about the website security. And by that, I mean, especially if you're a relatively unknown brand, people might be hesitant to purchase with you. So if you can say, we are secure, we're doing these things, you know, so like securely check out, use padlocks, that kind of thing. It's tried and tested, it works. It's quite gimmicky, but the numbers speak for themselves. Delivery information, add review and trust information. So you're building credibility there, you know, that lots of people have booked with you in the past, bought your products, and this is what they thought. If you add that kind of stuff right at the right stage, it will have a big impact. Reducing pressure of decision. So messaging about free returns, or use more different payment methods, such as Klarna, which is buy now, pay later. So essentially, you can buy a product through Klarna, they will ship it to you, and then you can pay within a fixed period of time, you know, 60 days to a year. Skipping upsells. So remove the upsell stage all the way to just make the skip button more prominent so they understand exactly how to get there, and how, if they're not interested, they can very easily see the way to get out of it. So now we're going to talk about how to actually present these ideas internally. What you need to do is essentially have a strong hypothesis. And by that, I mean, you need to talk about the problem as a statement and how you're going to solve it. So on a basic level, it's, if I do this thing, then this will happen. A better way of saying it is, if I do this thing, then this will happen because of this thing. So an example is, by increasing the primary call to actions contrast, then we expect to make more money because it's easier to distinguish. That is a good hypothesis because it explains what you're trying to do, to which area, and what you expect will happen. Now, I'll add a little bit. The bit I don't like about this is the more money. It's not necessarily tying you down to any specific point in revenue. Now, also, when you're doing conversion rate optimization, you need to be careful about what metrics to use. If you use revenue and you want to run a test, say changing color of a button from red to blue, that will take forever to get a result. You need to make sure that you pick metrics as close to the test as possible. So by that I mean, a good example in this case would be, by increasing the primary call to actions contrast, then we expect to see a higher percentage of users interacting with that button because it is easier to distinguish. We'll get a much more quick test there, and we'll actually see how that works. Now, what you might find is internally, that's going to be a difficult thing to communicate to stakeholders who necessarily aren't involved in that process. So you need to be very careful about how you communicate that message. So a good way of doing it is a goal tree, seeing how revenue is broken down into new and returning users, how it's broken down into conversion rate, and how that conversion rate is then potentially add to cart, like average order value, that kind of things. Tying these metrics together and showing how a metric that might be further down the funnel, like add to cart, directly impacts the revenue. So based on our previous examples, so addressing questions and concerns, these are some hypotheses that you could use, and this is a good example of that. So by adding information about the security of the transaction, then when we all expect to have users complete the transaction, because users will feel safer purchasing with us. So these are some more, buy now, pay later, removing the upsell stage. So at this point, you are happily running your CRO program. And then all of a sudden a hippo comes crawling into your lap. And sometimes it's not always a small, cute hippo. Sometimes it's a great, big, nasty, growling hippo. What hippo is? Highest paid person's opinion. This happens, right? The person with the most money in the room comes in, tells you what you should do. Sometimes that's not always a bad thing, but often it can be, especially when you're trying to run a productive program. So what I say is you need to prioritize the tests, and you need to do it in a way that you can communicate. So the other reason you should prioritize is that you can fix your user's pain quicker. So it might be that if you just pick willy-nilly off the top, you can make some money, or you can fix the problems at some point. But if you do it in the right way, you can make crap tons. Okay, but how do you do this? You need to pick a framework. There's lots of different frameworks out there. I'm not going to bore you to death, but essentially they all come down to confidence, impact, and ease. Confidence is, are we sure this is an issue? How many data streams have reported it? We've kind of talked about that already. Impact. So how much pain are we solving? Is it on a high traffic area of the website? What will the return on investment be? Ease. How long will this take to design and build? And do I need to expend political capital to do it? I.e., will it take a lot of time for the business to move to make this decision? Like I said, there's a few different ways of doing it, simple and complex. If you're starting out, use simple methods. Pi and ICE frameworks are fantastic. If you're more advanced, or you have a larger team that's going to be working on this, or you essentially have more hippos in your business, then a more complex framework where you're being more objective about your KPIs and how you actually describe the impact it's going to have on your business is the right thing to do. So, complex. An example of this would be, does this experiment take place on a page with more than 100,000 views per month? If yes, then it gets a point. If no, then it doesn't. Are we adding or removing an element? Yes or no. So you're essentially making very objective statements where multiple people can give the same answer, and it's not a case of, I think this thing, I think that thing. It's a framework that we can all agree upon and come to a common understanding of what is valuable. So these are the tests as we prioritize them. The top one comes out as add messaging about website security, so confidence, impact, ease. Fixing the problems, so I'm going to skip through these relatively quickly because I imagine a lot of you marketers already know about conversion rate optimization. But essentially, it's a framework to increase the likelihood that users will complete a desired goal. There's a few different ways of doing this. So split test, 50-50. It's fairly simple. Question for you guys. There's two pictures here. You might not have to see them because they're quite pixelated. But they look very similar, other than the call to action on those buttons is different. So the first one on the left says, read details and apply. Hands up, who thinks that will win? Okay, the second one says apply for job. Who thinks that one will win? Okay, I hate to say it, but you're all wrong. This is why we test these things, because read details and apply won. And again, you can only so much kind of figure out post why this thing happened, but it's because apply for a job, that link then takes you into a detail page where you learn more about the job. And so people would think that they click that button and then immediately go to apply when they actually want to just learn more information about it. And so having a more descriptive action, call to action, that actually talks about what you're going to do and essentially the benefit as well is a much better way of doing it. Multivariate tests, don't have the time, so you can do multivariate tests, they're more complicated, lots of more variables. For businesses that have been doing a more of a comprehensive CRO program, it's a good way to go. This is a test that we ran on a similar site. We have had 54 different changes in the same test, thousands of different variations and combinations together, and we took essentially that call to action rate from 7% to 18%, which is quite drastic. And there's much essentially, it combines all the different elements together in different generations. This is the core experiment loop. So building your hypothesis, designing your test, building your test, putting it live, QAing it, running analysis. It should be a flywheel. You should be building positive momentum by doing this. So you're essentially learning and feeding back into each other repeatedly. So when you win and your test is won, it's easy. Everyone's going to love you. You're going to report how much money you've made the business. That's fine. I don't want to talk about that. It failed. Everything's terrible. I'm going to lose my job. Everybody hates me. It's fine. Don't panic. Failed experiments are bullets dodged. So when we report to businesses on failed experiments, what we say to them is that if you just implemented that idea, if someone in your business, say Hippo, had that idea, and we just implemented the website without testing it, you would have lost X amount of money. This is why we test. This is why having a test and learn program is so important, because you will essentially save your business money. The second thing is that there are key customer learnings in this. And if you don't share those around your business, then essentially you're losing out there as well. So by testing and failing, as long as we don't keep failing and making the same mistake, we're going to be in a good position. So it's fine. One, report on exactly what the impact could have been if you'd not done it correctly. And two, share those results around the business, because you might essentially save someone else from making a similar mistake. So why do we do CRO? Because we want to understand the business impact of our decisions. And we also want to innovate on the user experience in small incremental changes that are easy to test and not big bang releases where, to be fair, I've never seen a new website go live in its entirety and the conversion rate stay the same or rise. It always drops. If you do small changes over time, you'll essentially have a much better return. I'm going to skip through these. Essentially, I spoke about good UI earlier. These are patterns that work some of the time. These are actual insights you can take away. Have a look at good UI because they've got some fantastic different patterns. There you go, good UI, right at the end. So summary, know who your users are, find out what problems they have, test your fixes, and then learn from those and share your results around. Thank you very much, guys. Come to you after for a free audit.